Welcome to LionHeart Talks, a series of podcasts from LionHeart.
Hello and welcome to the LionHeart Talks podcast. This episode is one of two we're recording to mark Grief Awareness Week. But before I go any further, let me introduce myself. I'm Jo Grant, the Training and Wellbeing Projects Manager at LionHeart, and I'm pleased to be joined today by two guests, LionHeart Ambassador Claire Martin and LionHeart Communications Manager Hayley Draper. Hello both, and thank you for joining me today.
Hi Jo.
Hi.
So, bereavement and grief are something we will all experience at some point in our lives, but it's a topic many of us feel uncomfortable discussing, which is why I'm so grateful to you both for joining me today to talk about your experiences. But I also wanted to point out before we start that these are just two people's experiences, and it's important to remember that bereavement and grief, the grief process, will be very individual. People grieve in very different ways, and these can be based, these can vary based on our relationships with the person that we've lost, with the situation and circumstances surrounding their death as well. So, for example, feelings around sudden death might vary very differently to that of those feelings of watching someone you love decline through illness. So let's get started. Claire, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your story?
Of course. Hi Jo. It's a pleasure to be here and thanks for inviting me to share my experiences. So I'm a surveyor. I've been a chartered surveyor for 20 odd years now. And as you said, I'm a LionHeart ambassador as well. And the reason that this podcast is particularly important to me and poignant for me is that coming almost on for 10 years ago, I was widowed. I lost my husband when I was 35. I was a practicing surveyor. I was a wife. I was a mum of a young daughter. And that was the last thing I saw coming for my life at that time, when I was in the period of focusing on family and career. And definitely found my experience and my journey since then has been tale of two halves. Some very, very bleak and difficult times, but equally some very positive times and some amazing things that have come out of those experiences over the last 10 years. But I definitely found it a very difficult experience being the age I was and sort of feeling very isolated and alone, not knowing anybody else who is of a similar age and having lost a husband or a spouse. And so that's why I want to perhaps shine a light on my experience today through this podcast.
Thank you. And we really appreciate you being here to be able to share those experiences. And Hayley, could you tell us a little bit about your story as well, please?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in awe of Claire because I can't imagine what it must be like to deal with such a significant loss at a young age. I suppose my experience is perhaps a bit more universal. I've lost both of my parents. I lost my mum last year and my dad 6 years ago. And I guess that is more likely to be experienced by people who are of working age. The reason that I've agreed to be on this podcast is that I kind of think that although it is something that most of us will experience, all of us will experience at some point, it seems to me that we don't talk about it very often or as much perhaps as we should. And that's my reason for kind of wanting to chat things through. This time last year, I wrote a blog for the LionHeart website. It was almost like a journal, really, of the year that I'd experienced since I'd lost my mum. And I had a really amazing response to that. Lots of comments, lots of emails to my work address. And it was really clear that, it had sort of struck a chord with lots of people. And almost universally, those comments were like, yeah, that's how I felt. But, we didn't talk about it or I didn't really have anybody to talk to. So yeah, that's why I've agreed to be here.
Thank you, Hayley. I think that's a really important point to make, isn't it? We've said grief, bereavement, they're a topic that many people feel it's so hard to talk about, but so important to talk about to help people feel less alone, feel that it's safe, or that it is fine to talk about these hard subjects, because it really does help those people that are going through those situations. We know that most people will perhaps understand or know what some of the bereavement grief process might look like. But what was your journey like, both initially and in the longer term as you grieved your partner, Claire? Let's start with you.
For me, my husband, Ben, died from cancer, and we had a sort of 18-month journey leading up to that, from his initial diagnosis, then surgery, chemo, before we then got a final terminal diagnosis. So for me, a lot of the bereavement and the grief process started before he died.
Okay.
I learnt through receiving some counselling, sort of what was going on, what I was feeling, which I understand there's a label which is called anticipatory grief, and so I was feeling a lot of those feelings and emotions, which perhaps can come later. I was experiencing them earlier, and the counselling was fantastic because it helped me to not, or try to help me focus on enjoying the time we had left whilst we still had Ben, and making those memories, whilst living alongside those feelings of grief which were coming. But I think for me, a lot of those feelings of grief were also bound up intrinsically with a lot of sort of practicalities and logistics, because of the age I was, and losing my husband. I was flummoxed by the logistics of life, becoming a single parent. Could I cope financially? A lot of those sort of mundane parts of life, but they did overwhelm me and consume me initially, worrying about how I was going to look after being left alone with our daughter. And so there are a lot of emotions going on in those times, and being able to deal with the practicalities to then allow me to focus on the feelings of loss and grief took time, and took quite a lot of help and support to navigate through that.
As you said, there was a lot there, I guess, that you never thought that you'd ever have to deal with. It's not something that any of us would expect to sort of go through at the age that you were at the time. Were you able to find other people that you could relate to at any point in that journey, or did you feel very much isolated for a lot of your initial period of grief?
Initially, no, I didn't, Joe. I wasn't able to reach out and find a network, or find anybody in particular. But without doubt, counselling did help me on that journey and through that time. I did, after Ben had died, get an amazing message from somebody that I had been at school with, actually.
Right.
I hadn't kept in close contact with, but through the wonderful power of Facebook, they had picked up on what I'd been going through, and they'd reached out. They actually had themselves lost their husband,
Oh,
through a different set of circumstances.
yeah.
But she was fantastic support. We met up. She had two young daughters, actually,
Okay.
and we met together. We got our girls all together for a play date, and I was able to ask her some questions that perhaps somebody else may not understand, unless you've
Yeah.
been widowed with a young daughter or a young child. And we were able to have a really honest and open conversation. And she was just like a guardian angel that sort of swooped in just at a time when I was feeling particularly isolated and sort of alone in that sense. But what I did find through the whole process, from the day that Ben was diagnosed, is that, and I think, Hayley, you alluded to it, support comes from the most unexpected places sometimes. People feel motivated to drop you a message or reach out, and it really touches you when you're having a bad day, to know that somebody's thinking about you or empathizing with what you're going through. So there were definitely other people who came out of the woodwork that perhaps hadn't walked the same journey, but were able to be there for me and help me through that period, which was just a sort of the positives that I alluded to in the introduction of what also comes out of sad times.
Yeah. And sometimes I think it can come from complete strangers. I found, you would kind of expect like close friends or colleagues, especially working where I work. My colleagues were amazing, but I can remember a few weeks after I lost my mum. It was Mother's Day, and I went to the supermarket and had one of those moments where I kind of walked in and it was like a sea of pink. There were cards and flowers everywhere, and I can remember just sort of standing there and just kind of like sort of tears sort of bubbled up out of nowhere, and an older lady just came up to me and she said, "Are you okay?" And I just said, "My mum died." And she just put her arms around me and said, "It really hurts, doesn't it, my love?" Complete stranger, and then off we went. I kind of pulled myself together, off I went to do my shopping. But it's moments like that, I think, it is something that if you've been through loss and grief, it does kind of it does resonate with you almost, I think, forevermore. Like you will always spot the signs in somebody else and want to, I don't know, try and make it better if you can.
That's given me goosebumps, that story, Hayley. That was beautiful. I think sometimes or somehow feel easier to do that to a stranger somehow than sometimes your closest,
Yeah.
to be able to go up and have that interaction and if you can just be that sort of, bit of light in that day for 10 seconds in a supermarket, then it does make a difference. And I think, Hayley, hearing your story and certainly my experience is that, if everybody could do that for everybody, when we see somebody that you think might be going through something, I think it's powerful that we can think about that more and share those connections more.
Hayley, we've not asked you that same question. So what was your journey like, both initially and sort of longer term as you've been through that grief process?
I think it's surprising that you can respond to two losses in different ways. I think I lost my dad 6 years ago. I was very much a daddy's girl, and that really, it did hit me hard. My boys were quite young at the time, and I think although obviously I grieved, it was slightly different because it was wrapped up with making sure mum was okay and and checking in on the kids who were still primary school aged at that time. And I think there's something that practice doesn't make perfect with grief or loss. It's, you might understand that you won't always feel quite so raw and things will change for you over time, but it doesn't make it any easier when you then lose, another person that's, very, very important to you. I think the thing with losing my mum, it was, I don't know, it felt, obviously it's significant, it's a significant loss, but it was something about my last parent almost, and it felt really, I don't know, profound in a way. I can't quite explain it. It's just I felt like I'd lost some sort of anchor that had been there my whole life. That was,
Okay. Yep.
sort of my last sort of surviving parent. Um, I can remember thinking it's like it's really weird. It's like I'm middle aged. I have children who are now teenagers. I hadn't lived at home for decades really, and so I'm very much a grown up. But there was something about losing my mum that made me feel sometimes very childlike. It was like, I can't possibly adult at this time. Like, you know what I mean? It's like it was a big loss, and it happened very very quickly. Although it was cancer, it was a kind of a really dizzying kind of 3 week period between us having the news it's cancer and then the bad news kind of kept rolling. It was like, and it spread and so it was like sort of 3 weeks from that diagnosis to when we lost her, and that again, it was kind of a bewildering speed that things kind of unravelled. I think what Claire said also about anticipatory grief, I had no idea that was a thing, but it was almost that 3-week period was almost harder, I think, than the immediate aftermath of having lost mum, because you are grieving at that time, but you're trying to juggle everything else. You're trying to figure out, what are we going to do if she's discharged from hospital? How are we going to manage that care? You're kind of looking after everybody else. You're kind of bracing yourself for the inevitable, but not quite knowing what that's going to look like. And I found that really, really hard.
I can absolutely empathise with that, Hayley. After we received Ben's terminal diagnosis, he was given 3 months at that point. He did end up fighting for 6 months, and he did actually end up passing away. It was 5 days after Harriet's 3rd birthday, so he'd hung on. I think I do think that he'd hung on to see her turn 3, which was amazing.
Wow.
It really was amazing. But I do remember those last 6 months, it being for want of a better word, it was grim. It was a grim time for everybody. The practicalities, the logistics, the hospital visits, the visits from a nursing team, and then eventually hospital, and then eventually a hospice. And there is a sense that time, it did feel harder as well, for all of those reasons, feeling those anticipatory grief, as well as all those logistics and practicalities. And I struggled initially afterwards with that guilt of feeling a sense of relief after Ben had died, this big thing that you'd been waiting for. And because, we knew we'd had that terminal diagnosis, we knew where the story was ending. You have this biggest event that you're ever going to have in your life sort of hanging over you. You know it's coming. You don't know quite when.
Yeah.
And there is a sense of the calm after the storm, where you do have that sort of letdown of total sadness that this person is gone, but a big sense of relief that the hardship and the difficulties for everybody, for Ben included, for the person included, is over.
Yeah.
But that was difficult. I felt very guilty. I felt very conflicted about having those feelings, and sort of it took me a while to allow that to sit comfortably with me, and to recognise that I wasn't a bad person for feeling that too.
It is. I completely get that. It's like you're torn between wanting it to be over for the right reasons, because it can be brutal watching somebody fade away. I think especially if it takes a while to get the drugs right, and you kind of you're sort of torn between wanting to keep hold of that person for as long as possible, and yet wanting that grim period to be over, because you can't bear to watch somebody in pain or feel agitated or confused. It's really hard, isn't it? You kind of go round in circles, and that is it going to be today? Should we? So my mum spent her final maybe 10 days in a hospice, and certainly the last few days, myself and my sister were there a lot, and it was like every evening it almost got to is it do we go tonight, do we stay, is it and it's, do we step out, do we go and get that cup of coffee or that shower? It's a hard time.
I think what was bound up and complicated things even further for me was having a young child in the mix, whilst I was having those exact thoughts, Hayley. And a lot of the journey of grief for me has been not only coming to terms with my feelings and how I was dealing with everything, but seeing it through Harriet's eyes and walking alongside her with her journey. Because obviously that's been a very different experience for her. She was, as I said, she was just turned 3 when he died, which is almost now 10 years ago. She's soon to be turning a teenager, and obviously the change in her in that 10 years is obvious. And I was given great advice about how to navigate that with her, and that I would need to revisit her questions around grief and her grief journey sort of at those developmental stages, which you can clearly see when somebody starts school and their understanding grows more about the world, and as she travels through life. So I have had sort of two parallel journeys, if you like, going on. I've got my own journey, but I've also got hers, which as a parent you need to manage and be a part of, and be there to answer her questions. So it does add a sort of a layer of complexity to it, if you like, and trying to make sure that I was doing the right thing by her as well as myself.
A lot to think about at a very difficult time. Hayley, I know you're also a parent, so did you feel an extra level of responsibility there as well with your two
Yeah.
children? And did that change with them being different ages?
Obviously, my dad was, it was their first experience of grief. They were 8 and 10, I think, at the time. They were very close. My mum and dad had always been involved with childcare, holiday, helped out at holidays when I was at work. They were very much part of the boys' lives, and yeah, it really hit them hard. I think although my dad was ill, and we knew that it was a terminal condition, the end came very fast. He had an infection that kind of spiraled out of control. So we weren't necessarily prepared in the same way as we were for my mum. I can remember learning something, I suppose, from my eldest child after dad had died. He was very, very tearful. And I remember a few days after we'd lost dad, he'd asked me something like, "I feel so sad, Mum. Am I crying too much?" And I was like, "Oh, my darling, there's no such thing. Let it out. That's what you feel, and that's quite common. That's because you loved him so much, and you're going to miss him." And I remember he looked at me and he said, "But you're not crying all the time." And it was like, oh. And I was like, "Well, actually, I was. I just wasn't doing it in front of them. I was picking my moment. It was that classic cry in the shower or cry in the car or let it all out when there's nobody else around." And I think at that moment I kind of realized actually that, I was trying to protect them
Yeah.
from what I was feeling, but actually that was absolutely the wrong instinct. And I said to him, "Oh, well, I'm probably doing it in secret, my love." And we had a good cry and a good cuddle, and it was like, well, I think I've learnt something. You've taught me something there, and it is like that. I need to be a bit more open about how I'm feeling, because it almost gives them permission to express it in turn. And I kind of took that on board, and was obviously they were older. Dylan was coming up for 16 when Mum was very ill, and Lucas was 13 going on 14, and unfortunately for them, they knew what was going to happen, and they knew how awful it was going to feel. And they were older, so I was able to be a bit more upfront with them about Mum was going into a hospice, and this is probably what it was going to look like. But yeah, I took that on board, and I was more open with them. It's hard though, I think, to watch as a parent. It's really hard to watch your kids grieve, because I think your instinct as a parent is to want to fix things, and you can't fix loss. You have to, go through it, and there's nothing you can do or say really to make it better. The only thing that will help them is time and feeling those feelings. And that's a hard thing, I think, to watch your kids go through.
That's a really great point, Hayley, because I think not only as parents, I think it's sort of human nature that we see somebody like the lady in the supermarket came to you. We want to try and fix it when somebody's hurting or something's going wrong. And I think that's perhaps why we all generally feel a bit uncomfortable or unable to talk so much about grief, which is why it's fantastic that LionHeart are doing this podcast now, because grief's the one thing, like you say, we can't fix, we can't solve. And I think if we're able to talk more about it, that's so helpful for everybody, because I think that's what stops a lot of people a lot of the time, not being able to wave the magic wand and make things better for somebody that they're seeing in front of them is hurting. It almost sort of stops people knowing how to do anything. But I think actually saying those comments, having a hug, is so beneficial. And I think just being able to remind people of that's really powerful.
I think one of the LionHeart counsellors, I don't know whether it was after mum or dad, had said to me at one point, the thing with grief is you can't outrun it. You might want to kind of park it for a while and not deal with it, but at some point it comes back to bite you. At some point it will catch up with you, and even if you try and suppress those feelings, and I think that's really true. If you don't let it out at the time, at some point it will resurface or come out.
So if you were talking to somebody now, well, as we are on the podcast, is there a piece of advice that you would give to people that are perhaps just recently going through a period of grief, that something that really helped you, some advice that was given to you, or just a thought from your own experiences?
I think for me, it's that you kind of, there are all these cliches, aren't there, about time heals, and obviously it does to a certain extent, because that those raw feelings don't stay with you forever. But to me, it's the unpredictability, and I would say that know that is normal, that it's not just like time heals and things get better, because they do, but there can be so many ups and downs, and you can, even months can pass and you can think that you're coping quite well, or you're going through, I don't know, your journey of grief as you think you should, and there's no such thing as should, by the way. But then something can happen, or there'll be some like bizarre trigger, and you can kind of end up, everything feels as raw as it did on day one or day two, and I think that always surprised me. And it surprised me the second time round as well, even though I'd experienced it the first time round. It's definitely not a linear thing. There are so many ups and downs.
I'd absolutely agree with that point. For me, I think the main, I don't even want to call it advice, because I don't know any more than anybody else. It's just my experience was that I wanted to be strong about everything. I don't know if it's the experience that brought out this sort of warrior woman in me, and I wanted to look after my family, and I wanted to solve everything and keep everybody safe and well. And people, strangers, friends, family would offer help, support. This was during the illness as well as afterwards. Can I cook you something, do some shopping for you, whatever? And the first few times I was too proud, maybe, or too tried to think I could do it all. Through the process, though, and certainly as time went past, I had to recognise my own vulnerability. I couldn't do everything, and I wasn't going to be able to solve and keep everybody safe. And so I think asking for help and accepting the help when it's offered as well. I think I'm sure there'll be offers of help coming to you naturally when you go through something. And I think to accept every offer of help that's given to you, I was too strong and too proud in the early days, and I wish I had been more vulnerable and accepted it, because people, it's a lovely way that people can support you, and I think it's okay. It's more than okay to ask for help and accept it, and let people help you along that journey, because I thought I could do it on my own, and I absolutely couldn't, and I couldn't have done it without every piece of love and support that I had. But it's taken me probably quite a while to recognise that I couldn't do it on my own.
Yeah.
Thank you both. I really appreciate your time today. Really appreciate your openness, your honesty on discussing a subject which I know can be quite hard to talk about. as we come to the end of the podcast, I did want to remind listeners about LionHeart. Reaching out for support can be challenging, but if you are an RICS professional, then LionHeart is here for you. Support includes counselling for RICS professionals and their partner or spouse as well. And we also have youth counselling service available to support children aged 12 to 18 of RICS professionals. Calls to LionHeart are confidential, and you'll be talking to somebody that understands surveyors and the profession that you work in. So thank you for listening to LionHeart Talks podcast. If you have been affected by anything that we've talked about today, then please do take a look at the LionHeart website to see how we can support you further. I've been your host, Jo Grant, and thank you so much to our lovely guests, Hayley and Claire.
Thanks so much for joining us on LionHeart Talks, and we hope you've enjoyed the episode. Subscribe now on your favourite podcast platform to hear from us again, and don't forget you can find out more about how we're helping surveyors and their families on our website, lionheart.org.uk.